the details here. When you draw a districting map, the first factor you consider is as nearly equal in population as practicable. That's the legal standard. But again, I think I may have mentioned this at the meeting 2 weeks ago. We're not stuck with absolute mathematical equality of each district. It doesn't have to be down to a person. The law allows some variance from perfect equality, up to 10% deviation. And what that means is your district with the highest population and then your district with the lowest population, the difference between the over and the under can be no more than 10%. That's the guideline provided by the Supreme Court. In rare cases, you might be able to go a little bit more than 10%, but that gets a little nuanced at that point. Generally, the benchmark is you keep the deviation at 10% or less. And then the reason that deviation is allowed is so you can consider the additional factors, keeping the districts contiguous. We talked a little bit about this a couple weeks ago, keeping communities of interest together. And as I'd mentioned at the last meeting, and I'll mention this time, communities of interest are neighborhoods that are held together by common social, economic ties that bind. It may be ethnic affiliation, language minority. It may be geography. It may be income level, socioeconomic status. These touchstones of commonality that would bind a neighborhood together. Those are the factors that you can look at in, deviating off perfect equality in order to not split up these kinds of neighborhoods, these communities of interest. Other things you look at is keeping the districts compact, so they're not, spread out like a can of worms. They tend to look more like boxes, diamonds, shapes like that. And then also you look at factors like district arrangement needs to make sense. Believe it or not, that's actually in the state law, that it has to be easily understandable. And then there are some other secondary factors that you can look at after you've looked at those primary factors. One thing you cannot look at is you cannot look at party affiliation. You cannot draw districts to put all the Republicans here and all the Democrats here and all the Libertarians over here. That's proscribed by law, so that cannot be done. And then within these broader parameters, the demographers do their magic, and they look at the populations, numbers, the balance, the geography of your particular agency, and then helps to draw the lines as appropriate that puts those factors to work, and then ultimately results in a population balanced map that doesn't have more than a 10% deviation with the over and the under, and meets those other factors. And with that, I'll hand that off to Mr. Wenke, and if you want to provide any additional detail, feel free.
Sure. So hi, my name is Brad Winnicke. I'm a senior vice president with Haystack DNA. Haystack is a data analytics company, and we again partner with Best and Krieger BB&K for municipal redistricting in California. So we provide mapping and technical services for jurisdictions that are gone through their districting process. We've worked at all levels. So this past cycle, we were the technical mapping consultants for the California state level Citizen Redistricting Commission. We also worked at the state level for Virginia and Ohio. 2011, we worked for the Arizona Independent Redistricting Commission. With BB&K this cycle, so far we've worked for over 35 cities, counties, and special jurisdictions. In addition to our work with BB&K, outside of that, I was the principal technical consultant for the City of San Diego's Independent Redistricting Commission. We also do VRA analysis, where we look for patterns of racial bloc voting that meet the criteria of California law. So I think we did this VRA analysis for 7 or 8 cities in California, a bunch of other cities in other parts of the country, and then we did this for the state of Montana. So in addition to some background, in addition to what Jim said, kind of from the technical perspective, I guess there's kind of 2 big pieces of this. One is the software. So the software for mapping is pretty specialized. You can buy mapping software from either one of two companies. One is called Maptitude, the other is called Autobound. Or this cycle, there's actually online tools. One is called Dave's Redistricting app, and the other is called District R. Super powerful tools that the public can use. So then the pieces of data that the software uses, the base layers are all coming from the 2020 census. So all redistricting starts at the block level, which in the case of the city is usually a physical block. But once you get out into the countryside, it can use things like railroad tracks or power lines to define it. But so your municipality is basically split up by the census into these tiny little block chunks, and then they assign population data to each block. And then there's additional data that's brought in called CVAP data, which is done from a different part of the census. CVAP stands for Citizen Voting Age, and this has kind of more refined racial breakdown data. The state of California then has an additional layer. So the state of California has an entity called the Statewide Database, and they do something called prisoner reallocation. So they take the base data that the census provides, and then they take all of the prison population and they reallocate that back to the blocks that they think those prisoners originally came from. And so when you redistrict in California, you have to redistrict with the statewide database redistricting software. So when we begin the process, usually you will draw your minority districts first, if possible. And you kind of draw these under federal law first, and then draw them under, if possible, and then you draw them under state law. Once you have the minority districts filled in, you kind of draw the rest of the districts around them. In addition to what Jim said, so again, you can't use partisan data. That data just never gets loaded in as a mapping layer. You also can't be aware of incumbent data. So the map drawers have to be blind to incumbent addresses. Can't draw districts to advantage or disadvantage incumbents. The way we've traditionally done this with BB&K, although there's been a little bit of leeway, is BB&K usually attends all the meetings and synthesizes all the information, and then kind of makes sure that our drawing instructions meet California legal standards, and they write them up, and then our map drawers kind of draw to that criteria. Usually in a scenario like this, we would, again, draw the minority districts first, make sure everyone's happy, legally sign off on those, and then we would draw 2, 3, or 4, probably 3 different maps, and submit those. As you get public comment, as you get feedback, we can then move forward with one map and tweak that based on comments, or move forward with two or 3 maps. And again, we just kind of make changes as the process asks us to. Hope that made sense.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I turn it back to the mayor. Would you like to take public comment now?
Before I take public comment, just want to ask if any council members have
Sure.
a clarifying question of you or Mr. Priest or Mr. Renke.
Sure.
Councilmember Vinson.
I have a question for Mr. Winke. We're about to have public comment. Besides what you've mentioned, is there any other information the community that can provide you that would help develop the map?
Sure. So in California generally uses a standard called communities of interest. And the definition of these is kind of purposefully vague. So it can really be anything. So a Native American reservation is definitely a community of interest. A if you were a larger city and you had multiple school districts, like a school district can be a community of interest, but it can literally be anything that someone like defines. So, hey, there's a whole bunch of Raiders fans in this area of the city, and we want to bring the Raiders back to California. Could technically be a community of interest.
That one may be a bit of a stretch.
But we'll often see things like homeowners associations, or the inbounds area for this elementary school, or people who are adjacent to this park might have common political interests that they want represented. And so to the extent that people can define kind of the things that they want to see kept together, those are super useful for metro.
Thank you.
If I may, I'll just add a quick comment to that. Whatever your particular vernacular is, just about every community I've worked with has a vernacular. There's, the East Side, North Hills, across the river, below Foothill Boulevard. I'm sure Pleasant Hill has vernacular for particular neighborhoods that over time have just commonly been understood to share social, cultural, economic, geographic, logistic commonalities. So, draw upon your own personal knowledge of your community. And then as you're taking public comment from those speaking this evening, they can have their opinion that they can lend to the discussion as well.